Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the I Love Me podcast, where we talk about self-love, positivity, and how to live holistically and authentically in all and everything that you are. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, Morgan.
Hi. How's it going?
You? I'm good. It's beautiful weather today, so I'm really energetic and in an exciting mood. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. You know, we've had some trial and errors moments trying to get this podcast rolling today, but we are finally here. Hopefully there's no more issues, and I'm just ready to have a good time and a great talk.
I'm ready to get this started. So tell the listenership a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so my name is Morgan Lynch. I go by the pronouns she, her. I am from the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia. I joke that, you know, if you go to Acadia University, get on a side road and just keep driving for about half an hour until if you drove any further, your car would be in the ocean. That's when you get to my road. And I'm not even kidding. But so needless, I kind of live in the middle of nowhere, but in the times when I'm not in the middle of nowhere, I am here at Mount Allison University. I'm just finished my second year of a Bachelor of Music degree with a minor in French, which, you know, I think is pretty rad and fun. But in terms of, you know, what's relevant to this podcast, I consider myself Indigenous/mixed race, sort of. I look pasty as all hell, so you wouldn't know it by looking at me. But my family through my mother's side is Mi'kmaq and also Acadian are kind of the two things that I consider myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So you mentioned how you said you're mixed race and have like Indigenous heritage and lineage within your family. Do you find it hard when people like try to like put you into this box of like, this is who you are and try to like define you based upon how you look?
Definitely. Because there's been situations both with, you know, more white peers and also Indigenous specifically, and also just other like people of color when they look at me and they're like, no, you're one of those people that'll go and say you're like, oh, I'm 15% this, 20% that. You're just like trying to say you're spicy white.
Right.
And I'm like, no, like I have Indigenous status. And like, I understand looking at me, you wouldn't expect, you know, I mean, brown hair, I guess, is part of it, but have my hair dyed blonde and like I have freckles and all that. You wouldn't expect it by looking at me.
Right.
And it's definitely been hard for me at times in my life, kind of looking at other people in like the BIPOC community and the Indigenous community and not feeling quite like I fit in there because I wasn't raised within my heritage as much as I would have liked to have been, but also looking at, you know, the white community and seeing like, oh, well, there's these things that's happening that A, are hurtful to me, and B, like, it's also, I feel like just by committing to that part of my heritage, I am doing what the people who were colonizing North America in the 1700s wanted, which is erasing that part of my culture. So it's like, it's been a really hard kind of line to walk, and I've struggled with it throughout my life growing up, and it's something I'm still working on to kind of find a balance, I guess.
You mentioned how like you struggled with it like growing up and like dealing with that and like trying not to like fall back into like the pattern of like erasing that part of like your life and history. So like what experiences have you gone through to like try and like bring and connect with the culture, with the Indigenous culture?
Well, when I was really young, or I guess I should start back with a little bit more of my family history, because, you know, everyone that wants to, or there was a certain time in our history fairly recently where, you know, the white Anglophone family was the way to be.
Right.
And for my grandparents on my mother's side, I had my Indigenous grandmother, who also has some Acadian ancestry in there too. But there was her. She was going to school to become a nurse, which, you know, was becoming more and more common, but still was, you know, a bit of a crazy thing at the time. And then there was my grandfather, who didn't finish high school and went into the military as a Francophone man. Now, he is not Indigenous, but in the military at that time, he's told me about how, like, they saw Francophones as less than.
Right.
So he erased that part of his culture. He started speaking only English. Now he only speaks like broken French to his siblings and stuff when he's speaking to them one-on-one. But between that pressure from the military and just societal pressure in general, my grandparents kind of decided that, you know, we want to fit into this white nuclear family because that is what seemed to be successful. In order to be successful in the workplace or in the military, this is who you need to be.
Right.
So they raised my mom and her two sisters in that way. And then when my mom had my brother and I, we were raised in very much that similar way. In fact, I didn't even really know I was Indigenous for a while growing up. I remember my dad would like mention it, like we'd be watching something on TV. I remember like lying on the couch, or I think maybe it was actually like in my parents' bedroom. I was like sitting on their bed watching this program, and my dad was like, "Oh, hey, that's like part of your guys' culture." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Like, I had no idea. And it's just because they kept it so hush hush for so long.
Yeah.
And then they didn't even like put it on our papers at school that we were Indigenous until around 3rd or 4th grade. I remember being called out of class once, and there was like a student support worker in all the Nova Scotia schools that would like work with the BIPOC students. And it was a very small town, small school. So it was me, and I think the majority of the other students there were Black. And I looked at myself and I looked at them, and I'm like, what am I supposed to have in common? I don't know enough about this. And it was interesting for me. And I remember really enjoying that experience, but not quite understanding what it was supposed to be. And then I told my mom about it, and she was like, oh, I didn't realize they would pull you out of class with like the Black kids and stuff like that. And of course now we hear that and we're like, yikes. But at the time it was just like, oh, she didn't expect me to kind of be singled out for this thing that I wasn't like showing outwardly and that they weren't really teaching me about. So I kept doing things with this like student support group throughout all school, like it followed through middle school and stuff like that. And I had some really cool opportunities. Like they would take us out to different presentations for like Black History Month, or like some Indigenous artists were putting on like a performance or something. We'd go to those, and I really enjoyed it, but I didn't really know much in depth, and there was always something in me that was like, come on, you need to learn more about this. So in high school I started doing some of my own research, because I transferred to a high school actually that had a student support worker for the Black students. There wasn't one for like Asian students, I don't think, or like other people of color. And then there was like barely any sort of supports for Indigenous students, except for we had a student teacher that came in my grade 12 year that acted in that role, but then when she went away, that support went away. And I just was like, I'm sitting here and I'm kind of looking at all these experiences I've had, and I can't help but think, why am I not knowing more about this? Because I don't know, exact percentages or whatever, but I do know that no matter how much of me genetically is Indigenous, that by ignoring it, it's just exactly what the colonizers wanted in the first place. So I started doing my own research. I contacted some extended family who we're not super close to, who is more involved in the genealogy. And like we weren't involved with our specific nation at all. So I reached out and got status with them and everything. And I started doing my own work. And with the student support worker at the school, that was really good, because we were making all of these strides to get some more inclusivity and representation within my high school. But then once that student teacher's term ended, they didn't fill that position. Yeah. So then all of that stuff that we were planning, like, oh, an Indigenous representative for the student council and stuff like that, just kind of fell out into nowhere because they never did anything about it. And it was really frustrating, but I just kept doing research on my own. And I was able to like even trace my genealogy back to like the 1700s and like see like where my family came from, because a lot of it's well documented, but it's just hard to find. So, and again, I didn't use like any of those online things. It was like people. No, I didn't use anything like that. It was people who, a lot of it was actually people who were writing about like relations between the Acadian and the Mi'kmaq people. There was a bit of that, and then there was like talking to other members of my family, and we were able to figure out that there's like, these like 4 families and stuff that were Acadian and Mi'kmaq, and then like kind of stayed within the Mi'kmaq community and everything like that. So we were able to figure that out, and I realized we were eligible for status, but we weren't like carrying the cards and everything. We weren't like doing what we needed to do to have ourselves recognized. So, but I kind of brought that issue up to my family, and now some of us, not everybody in my family who is, but like my mother and my brother and I believe my grandmother now actually have our status, which is good because of the research I've done. And although I think they were kind of like, well, I don't know what this is going to do for me. When I got that, it felt kind of freeing in a way, because it's like, okay, this is validated. I'm not just someone who is saying that I am Indigenous or not fully white just to, you know, get attention and be special.
Yeah.
It's like finally someone else is validating what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a huge part of it. But it has been hard, especially because I don't look it, and I've had some people be really discouraging because of that. And when I first came to Mount Allison particularly, I had a bad experience with another student who was saying like I wasn't Indigenous enough or something, and it kind of scared me off of like participating in some of the events here.
Yeah.
With like the Mount Allison Indigenous support group, because I wanted to so bad, but I was thinking, well, even though, you know, I know for me that I'm Indigenous and I'm enough, like, are people gonna be hostile towards me thinking that because, you know, I wasn't raised with this part of my culture that I don't belong? But then I mentioned it in a class that I took at the beginning of this year, which was put on by the amazing Dr. Kira Galway, called Music School and Society. We were talking about making our music classrooms and our music education more inclusive, and essentially how like music education and social justice go hand in hand and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned being Indigenous in just a discussion we were having, and another classmate reached out to me, and she was like, oh, I had no idea. And we went out for like brunch after one of our classes, and she encouraged me to go to like the teepee raising that we had earlier this year. And I haven't been able to go to anything since then just because there hasn't been an events that have lined up with my schedule. But being there in that space, it was kind of the first time since coming to Mount Allison that I felt accepted. Now, I took like the support from that classmate who reached out to me, and so I didn't have the courage to do it on my own, which I regret. But it was like kind of having that validation again and being there and helping, you know, raise this teepee on campus. It was like really a moment for me where I finally felt kind of recognized, and like I was finally doing something about this like void in my history. And I don't know.
Did you find like the support group that you first got into when you were in like the 3rd or 4th grade was like the catalyst or like the key driving force into like you helping you accept like this is a part of my culture, this is who I am?
I'd say so. It wasn't, like I said, it was a very small school, and it was essentially if you were any box on like the people of color thing that you checked off when you did your school registration, you got pulled in. Right. So while it wasn't necessarily like super specific to my culture, I found that it was the thing that got me to start thinking about it, because we didn't talk about it in my family. And I don't know if there was anyone in my family who was involved in residential schools. I know that, or at least I don't believe my grandmother was, at least. But it could have, I wouldn't be surprised if there was something further up that just isn't talked about, because of course in Indigenous families, so much of this trauma is never talked about. Yeah. Like that's a big thing. And I understand, like I don't blame, you know, my grandparents at all for, you know, wanting to fit the mold to succeed. But I can't help but wonder what my life would be like if I was raised both like with this Indigenous culture and also like with the French side, which I mean isn't obviously the big thing to reconcile. I mean, I'm doing a French minor here just because I enjoy the language, but it's just I don't know, I just think of how different my life would be if they didn't need to kind of hide parts of who they were to fit in and have success.
Right. So now that we've talked about like how you've come to terms and like how you've come to terms to accept your like Indigenous heritage, now that you've accepted your Indigenous heritage and like you've been living your life, living it authentically, like this is who I am, no one can tell me otherwise, and you've been validated, you validated that yourself. Have you ever had like any negative experiences surrounding your identity on who you are?
Like I said, I mean, there's still some people that like say things. Like I said, I had one bad experience with a student in my first year, and I know that because I don't look the part and I wasn't raised in the culture as much, that there's always going to be people who kind of doubt that I really have this part of my ancestry. And it's, like I said, it comes from both sides, both Indigenous people who rightfully so don't want like just white people without any say coming in on their spaces. Like that's totally understandable. But then there's a difference kind of between that and just like, I don't know, kind of not validating my experiences too, which was frustrating. And then also, like I said, there's the people that are like, oh, yeah, sure you are. Because there is a trend, and I noticed it in high school with some of my friends, actually, where people were saying like, oh, yeah, I'm Indigenous. And like I graduated, for example, I had a sash that was made by Indigenous elders in the community that I wore. There were people saying like, oh, I think I, might be Indigenous somewhere, and I should be wearing one of those too. But it's kind of different. There's a difference between like knowing it's there and just needing to connect with it and saying like, oh yeah, it's probably there somewhere, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's like kind of that thing that it feels like sometimes it's painted as if like, oh yeah, anyone can do this and say this is their thing, because really, we don't know what's completely in our genealogy or whatever. But it feels like that's kind of hurting my experience, because I trying to live like my own like authentic life, and having people from one side saying, oh, you're not Indigenous enough, and then having people from the other side being like, oh, well, I am just as Indigenous as you or whatever, but then not having like that real established connection to a specific community. It makes me feel like people don't really believe me.
Right. And it's always like that hard fine line, especially like when you're mixed. Like it's either you're not like, for my friends, it's like either it's like you're not black enough or you're not white enough. So it's always that fine line that you have to walk. And like sometimes you just have to be like, listen, I don't care what you define me as. I choose my own identity. Like, what you want to put me in your box, that's your box. You can define me as whatever you want to define me as. But I am who I am, and I'm going to live my life as who I am.
Yeah, I wish I could say that, I am like completely there, but I'm still working through that. And it's hard. And like my family is coming further, and like I said, there are some of us who have like our status cards now and like have that connection within our Indigenous community, but there's others who like I speak to, and for example, I have an aunt who I love dearly, but she's like, I'm not raising my kids with that because I wasn't raised with that, so why do they have any reason to believe that that's part of their culture? But I just feel like that's doing a disservice to the community.
I definitely agree.
Because like the people who put Indigenous children in residential schools and who came here and like took all of our land and stuff, this is what they wanted to happen.
Right.
Because it's their dream that, someone who is Indigenous will be like, oh no, that's not me, and step away from it. So I'm trying really hard to do the opposite, because I know that this is there and I don't want it to just be like left behind or forgotten.
Right. And like for me, I didn't find out about Indigenous culture until I came to Canada, because like the education system back at home, like we focus more on like countries close to us, I would say, like the US, and like we necessarily, I would say, we don't have like a formidable or like strong relationship with like Canada as we have with the US. So like when it comes to like Indigenous culture, learning about like Canada, there's always that like, oh, well, Canada is just like this nice place of like where everyone's accepted. Like it's so like rainbow sunshines and like no rain, no glitz, and it's all glitz and glamour. And like when I came here, it's just like, where's the rain? Where's the sunshine and rainbows? Like, it's like I have to fit into this box of like being black, and then it's like when I'm black, I'm like I have to fit into like the stereotypes of what black men are. So like it's like that hard line, especially coming from like a predominantly black country, now coming into a country where I'm like the minority. It's like I don't know. Like definitely. Sometimes I just don't know how to feel like here.
Yeah, and there's been like a journey for me of like just finding not only not putting myself in a box, but in a way also finding what boxes I do fit in.
Yeah.
Because since coming to university and kind of having that independence to explore myself and everything in the way that I'd like, I've also been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder and with ADHD. And I'm just looking back at like 8th grade me now, who was like super misunderstood and everything, and like I had no friends in my like middle school because I just like wasn't able to connect with people in the way I wanted to. And then big thing for me, I joined my community honor choir and everything clicked. And I was like talking about that all the time. It was like special interest neurodivergent thing, and it was the first place in a while that I felt accepted, but it wasn't for that part of my race. It was part of it was like a talent thing, and it was just this community that was positive and didn't seem to care. And it was and a lot of people that kind of I related to.
Yeah.
So I was talking about it a lot, and I'm like thinking about Kid Morgan, who, even though I had this community with choir, I was still in a small town, like going to school every day with people that like would be rude and bully me. And I'm just thinking, like, not only did she not have that community there, but she was struggling to communicate because of an undiagnosed ADHD and anxiety disorder, and also she didn't feel like she fit in with any of them because the whole like struggle with the race thing. So I just look back and I'm really like sympathetic to my younger self, because there was so much that I was dealing with that I didn't even know.
Right.
And it's only as I, get older and step away, from, in a way, by stepping away from my family, I feel like I'm getting closer, because I'm able to explore things in a way that I couldn't when I was right there. If that makes some sense.
Yeah, like definitely, like sometimes we feel as though like being close to our family like helps us in a sense, but it also like being distant from them also helps us to gain like that sense of independence.
Yeah.
Like having the time and like the ability to like reach out and like do things that you wouldn't normally do.
Yeah.
I have a question. Like,
yeah.
You now accept like your Indigenous culture. Do you find that times when you go around your family who's just like, I don't want to like put this part of me out there. Mm-hmm. I don't want to acknowledge this part. Do you find yourself reverting back to the times where you're just like, I'm just not going to acknowledge this?
I find I don't talk about it as much with them. I don't know. When I ever have that discussion, I usually do say similar to what I said to you, that, that's what I feel like the people who came and took our land and did all this, that's what they wanted to happen.
Yeah.
But eventually, I just kind of, just take a deep breath. And I think basically exactly what you said, that you can put yourself in whatever box you like. I can define myself how I like. I can't control whether or not they choose to accept this part of their identity. But what I can do is explain why I think it's important to.
Right.
And to like encourage. Yeah. But if someone in my family feels like they don't want to go through that process, then, that's for them to decide, I guess. Obviously, I have my biases, and I think it would be a great thing if my whole family could like sit down and like properly unpack this, but I know that's not going to happen. So I'll just try to be a support when I can and not judge people for the paths they're not ready to walk yet.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That was a message.
Yeah.
Like, not judge people for the path they're not ready to walk yet.
Yeah, because they might get there someday. And if I'm like, shaming them for where they are in their journey right now, that's not gonna create a positive outcome, because that'll just, first of all, it'll show that I'm hostile. I'm not someone that can be talked to about these things. But also, like, it could set someone back, and it could like be really intimidating. Like, is this really what I want to do? Yeah. If that's what it's going to turn me into, someone who's like all crazy and like aggressive about it. And I just think that everyone is at their own place in their journey in accepting who they are. And all you can do is be as supportive as you can and try to be a resource for that. You can't control the decisions other people choose to make.
You're just coming through with messages today on this podcast.
Oh, I did not intend to, but I'm glad that's working.
It's just like, I just love the things that you're saying, that you're spitting out. And like, now that you've come to terms with like, this is who I am, do you find yourself from when you were a kid to now, do you find yourself being like more happier, being like happy with who you are, living authentically in all that you are?
I find, yeah, definitely. I would say I'm not all the way there, and it's not just when I'm thinking. Yeah, it's a process, and it's not just the Indigenous part of me that I've been struggling with to get up there. Like, part of it is, like I said, I just got diagnosed with ADHD in January. My brother and all of my little cousins who also have ADHD were diagnosed when they were like 5 years old.
Yeah.
Why do I have to be diagnosed with them 20? And that's a big issue with women in like the neurodivergent community, is that we're often diagnosed a lot later than men.
Yeah.
So like there's stuff like that I'm going through, because I went to a different doctor because I couldn't get in with my regular one, and I thought something with my anxiety meds weren't working, and she was just like, have you ever considered this diagnosis instead? And I was like, holy crap, what?
Yeah. So
it's like stuff like that where I'm reading it and seeing like, oh, this explains that thing that I've been doing for years that I thought was just weird. And like stuff like that. But then also there's like going into my Indigenous ancestry and feeling kind of like more cemented in who I am as a person. And also just being able to, pursue music because I want to be a music teacher. And like I said, my choir that I was involved in, shout out to the Annapolis Valley Honor Choir, was like one of the first places where I really felt like I had a concrete community.
Yeah.
Because, I was like somewhat popular in elementary school-ish, and then trauma happened that is not related to this podcast. And I kind of lost that for a long time because, people see feeling your emotions as a bad thing, especially when it's not in like a typical way. But anyway, I had that community and it was so important to me, and I really want to become a music teacher and educator so I can provide that for students. And it's just like being able to kind of live my life how I want to and have that impact that I want to on the world. I feel like that's really big for me because it's something that like, Kid Morgan was at one point like wondering if she'd get here, like thinking like, okay, is it even like worth trying? Like, is the payoff going to be worth it? And while I'm nowhere near the end of this road yet, I think it's already looking up.
Oh my God. I love that. So what does self-love mean to you?
To me, I guess it just means kind of accepting yourself for who you are with like, even with your imperfections and everything like that, because I see a lot of the time that, people say self-love is like, oh, I am great. I am the greatest all the time. And there is an attitude for that. And like, I admire that confidence in people. But at the same time, if you have that mindset, you are kind of closing a lot of doors for growth. And one thing that I was taught pretty young that I stand by today is that the things you're going through and like the struggles you have are an explanation for your actions, but they're not an excuse for them.
Ooh.
So like someone
with the messages more. I'm
gonna say, so like if you're struggling with like, if you have like personal struggles with like, I don't know, your race or something, or if you're struggling with mental health issues, or if you have like ADHD or some other neurodivergent thing, like that's great. And I'm glad that you are working on that. But if you're not, if you do something because of that hurts someone else, the fact that you have, this thing going on in your life doesn't make that okay.
Right.
And you still need to be open to self-growth and trying to make yourself a better person. And that's one thing that has been hard for me to learn, because when self-love is like, oh, I love myself for everything that I do. No, you're not going to love yourself for everything that you do, because we're human beings and sometimes we're going to do things that maybe we shouldn't be proud of. Yeah. And it's all about, owning up to it and being gentle with yourself in those moments, but also recognizing that, I need to grow. Ooh. And I've been on both sides of this, where both I've done something that, due to anxiety or ADHD that I haven't been proud of, but also I've been on the other end where people keep doing things to me and then saying like, oh, it's because I have depression. And I'm like, oh, well, I'll forgive them for that. So it's been kind of setting up those boundaries and learning that message for me, that, it's okay to have these struggles, but you still need to take responsibility and grow, has helped me learn what self-love is, because to me, it's like accepting yourself in those moments, but also recognizing you need to grow. Because if you're just locking yourself into this position that I love myself how I am, I struggle with this, and this is what I do, this is what I like, this is how I'm going to respond to this situation every time, then that's not loving yourself. That's restricting. Ooh. Ooh. Yeah, because like, I know I'm leaning kind of more into the mental health side of it now, but
Morgan,
yeah,
come through. Oh,
yeah,
message.
Because if you really love yourself, you need to have moments where maybe you're not as proud of yourself as you should be, but you need to find a balance between being gentle with yourself and still like, being like, okay, I messed up, this is how I'm going to grow. Yeah. And finding that balance has been a big part of figuring out what self-love means to me. I'm sorry if this is a tangent that's not related to the original question.
I loved everything you just said. And I know for me, it's like an uphill battle.
Yeah.
Like I always find I'm always like hard on myself when it comes to like, if I mess up or like if I do something I shouldn't do. And like now I find myself like I give myself 24 hours to go through my feelings, to go through my emotions and go through it all. And then I analyze the situation and see how I can do better if I ever encounter the situation again.
Yeah. So like, I think to me, it's like a spectrum where like on one end you have this like, oh, I love myself all the time. I am perfect human being. I have no flaws. I am like a god on earth type thing, like that level of confidence. And then on the other hand, you have someone who's beating themselves up for every little thing and like hates everything you do. And what I think a lot of people consider self-love to just be that far end, but what I really think it is it's finding a balance in the middle where you are confident and happy with yourself, but you're still taking responsibility for your own actions and realizing that you are an imperfect person who needs to grow.
Right. So in those moments where like you feel like you need to accept yourself, or like in those moments you mess up, like what do you do to like bring yourself back up to be like, hey, like although this isn't okay, you're gonna be okay? Like, do you write poetry? I know you said you're into music, so like, do you like listen to like your classical music?
I don't, even though I'm a classical music major, I don't sit down and listen to like classical stuff a ton, except for like cool choir stuff with funky harmonies, because that's someone who like where choir was such a pinnacle and important part of my upbringing. There's always a soft spot in my heart for that, but I don't like sit down and listen to classical music that much. But I don't know. Generally, I like listen to music or relax, or for me, just kind of talking my thoughts through also helps. Like my boyfriend Noah has been very good with that, and that's actually we became friends in first year, but it was actually like during quarantine when I was like struggling with a bunch of things. I had a bad breakup, and like I was back home, and it felt like, you know, I was finally making all this progress, and then COVID hit and I was like back to zero.
Yeah.
And it was really discouraging, and then he at one point was like, okay, I can tell like something's up. You don't need to tell me anything if you're not comfortable, but just know I'll always like be here for you if you need to talk. This is like a couple months before we were dating. It was kind of him opening that door, and like, I don't know, having him to talk to, it was been huge for me, because I'm someone who like, if I bottle stuff up, I will like explode, and like I get super tense. Like I should be getting back into this, but I'm technically supposed to have like prescribed massage therapy for like anxiety tension, but I have not been going as much, or just like it all got off the rails because of COVID. So it's like having someone to talk to and like to release those feelings to, even if they don't understand, if they just are there to listen. I find that helps me a lot, because if you can't tell, if you've made it this far in the episode, you know, but if you can't tell yet, somehow I like to ramble a lot. And it's just like, as I'm rambling, I like can come across new ideas and like get feelings out there and like sort through things. If I keep it in my head, I find like my anxiety will like snowball it. But if I get it out into the universe, it like helps me sort through it more.
Yeah.
So I just kind of ramble until something clicks, and usually it works. And having someone to like talk to and support me through that helps. And I know that not everyone has that all the time. There's definitely times in my life where I didn't have that, but I can just, I don't know, I'm just very thankful that I'm in a position now where I do have someone that I can like let it out to.
Yeah, like I love that. Like we are definitely complete opposite.
Yeah.
Because like
fine.
For me, if I'm like upset, if I'm like down, like my friends would have to like beg me, like, what's going on? Talk to me, like let me know.
Yeah.
Like they'd be the last person I go to like for that like support.
There is a bit of that with me as well, because especially if it's a real low point, I'll want to keep it in, and like that, but that's really self-destructive for me, because like I get really tense and I keep it in and it snowballs. So I want to be the person like you where I just keep it in and I'm like, I don't worry anybody. But I know that for me to be like my most like healthy self, I need to express that to somebody, or it will just present itself in other ways that aren't healthy.
Plus, I feel like I just like the attention.
That's fair. That's valid. And everyone needs to go through things differently. Just because something works for me doesn't mean it'll work for you, doesn't mean it'll work for whoever's listening. It's just, you know, my experience.
Yeah. So, like, as we close out this episode.
Yeah.
Final question.
Okay.
What would be your piece of advice to someone who was in your situation when you were younger? What would you tell them that would help them along the way?
Just that I know that other people are going to say, like, you know, maybe that you don't count, or that, you know, you're just kind of making it up for attention. But if you know that that part of you is there, it's okay to look for it and to do research and to realize that part of yourself. Because, again, as I've said this over and over, but it's so true, it's what the people who like colonized this country and put kids in residential schools and did all of these horrible things, it's what they wanted.
Yeah.
That you'll be kind of giving in to what they want. If you kind of know this part of you is there, you have a tangible connection to it, and you just let it go, because it would be easier not to. it's not always an easy path. Like, obviously, I've had a lot of struggles and stuff with it as I've come to recognize it, but I feel proud now that I'm not just kind of letting that side of history win me over. And I think that you just need to me, kind of keeping that in mind really helped. You just kind of know in your heart that this is a path you need to take, and don't let other people doubt you, and just, I don't know, don't let the colonizers win.
Yes, do not let the colonizers win.
Exactly.
Oh my God, Morgan, thank you for joining me on this episode. This has been such an insightful episode. You've come through with so many messages.
I hope I'm glad. Thank you.
Don't judge people for the journey they're not ready to walk yet. Love that. That's gonna be my new Instagram bio.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Rad. And I don't know. I guess advice I think if there's another piece of advice just for anyone, not for someone like who's specifically in my shoes, what someone's going through is an explanation, not an excuse, is also a big thing.
Ooh.
Because like I mentioned earlier, I've been in positions both where I am the person who needs to take that in mind and be like, okay, I might be going through this thing. That doesn't make it okay. And then also seeing it like someone else treating you, like that doesn't make it okay either.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's my advice to the broader audience.
Oh my God. I love that. Thank you for joining me on the show, Morgan. It's been such a pleasure to have you here, giving your insightful thoughts, your insightful insights, and giving me a bucket load of wisdom.
Oh, thank you for having
pass
me.
this on to everyone else. No problem. It's been such a great pleasure. I see you coming to work every day. You're always so happy, and I'm just always excited to see Morgan. Because Morgan gives me like the energy I need.
Thank
okay.
You. I don't know. I feel like it's kind of chaotic environment. Sometimes in our office, like you and Shashank will be like at each other's throats, and Sian will just be quiet, and I'm just here like, hey. Hello.
Oh my God. Thank you for coming in. This is such a great show. My name's Thor.
I'm Morgan.
And we are out. Thank you guys for listening.